My name is Harvey, and I'm 31 years old. As a software developer, I worked 60-hour weeks for years to afford my dream lake house in New Hampshire. After my divorce, this place became my sanctuary, my pride and joy. Last month, I drove 6 hours to spend my vacation there, only to find my sister Natalie and her husband Derek had moved in without permission. When I tried to use my key, I found they'd locked the deadbolt. Through the window, Natalie laughed. "Sleep in your car, Harvey. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had family. Take advantage of your generosity." Growing up in a middle-class suburb outside of Boston, my relationship with Natalie was complicated from the start. Being 4 years younger, she was always the baby of the family, the one who got away with everything while I had to be the responsible one. Our parents worked hard, Dad as an insurance salesman, and Mom as a school administrator to provide us with a comfortable life, but they had different standards for us. I remember when I was 12 and Natalie was 8, I got grounded for a week after accidentally breaking a window while playing catch in the yard. 2 years later, when Natalie did the exact same thing, she got off with a simple, "Be more careful next time." This pattern continued throughout our childhood. I had to earn my allowance by mowing lawns and taking out trash, while Natalie received hers just for existing. Don't get me wrong, our parents loved us both, but the disparity in expectations was clear. By high school, the differences in our personalities became even more apparent. While I joined clubs, maintained straight A's, and worked weekends at the local grocery store to save for college, Natalie focused on her social life and expected our parents to solve any problems that came her way. When she wrecked her first car, a 16th birthday present, I never received our parents replaced it without much fuss. When I needed a car for college, I bought a used Honda with my own savings. College was a turning point for me. I attended University of Massachusetts on a partial scholarship, working 2 part-time jobs to cover the rest. I lived in the cheapest dorm available, ate ramen more times than I care to remember, and sacrificed my social life to focus on my computer science degree. Meanwhile, Natalie attended a private college with tuition fully covered by our parents. She changed majors 3 times and took 6 years to graduate with a communications degree she never used. After college, I landed a job at a tech startup in Boston. The hours were brutal, often 60 to 70 per week, but the experience was invaluable. I lived frugally in a tiny studio apartment with 3 roommates, putting every spare dollar into my savings. My goal was always clear: financial independence, and eventually, my own place by the water. During this time, I met Elizabeth. She was smart, ambitious, and worked as a marketing executive at a firm downtown. We dated for 2 years before getting married in a modest ceremony. Our relationship was good for a while. We were both career-focused and supported each other's goals. But cracks began to show in our 5th year together. Elizabeth thrived on city life, the restaurants, theaters, networking events. I dreamed of quiet weekends by a lake, fishing at dawn, and stargazing at night. She wanted to climb the corporate ladder in Boston. I wanted to eventually work remotely from somewhere peaceful. Neither of us was wrong, but we wanted fundamentally different lives. Our divorce was amicable, but painful. We divided our assets fairly, with no children to consider. The experience left me emotionally drained but more determined than ever to pursue my dream. The lake house became my post-divorce goal, the light at the end of the tunnel. For 3 years after the divorce, I worked harder than ever. I moved to a senior developer position at a larger tech company, took on freelance projects on weekends, and invested wisely. Every decision was calculated toward my goal. When friends invited me to expensive trips or nights out, I usually declined. When my apartment building's elevator broke for the 5th time in a month, I reminded myself it was temporary. Finally, at 30, I had enough saved for a down payment on a lake house in New Hampshire, $475,000 for 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and 200 feet of private shoreline. The moment I signed those papers was the proudest of my life. No one had handed me anything. I'd earned every square inch through sacrifice and determination. During those years of saving and working, my relationship with Natalie grew increasingly distant. She married Derek shortly after college, a guy I never trusted. Derek talked big about his business ventures, but seemed to bounce from one get-rich-quick scheme to another. They lived well beyond their means, posting pictures from expensive vacations while simultaneously texting our parents for temporary loans. I received the occasional text from Natalie, usually when she needed something. The most recent messages had hinted at financial troubles. They'd been evicted from their apartment in Boston, she said, due to a misunderstanding with their landlord. I expressed sympathy, but kept my distance, having learned from past experiences that getting involved in their financial chaos only enabled more irresponsible behavior. When I decided to take 2 weeks off work for a much-needed vacation at my lake house, I didn't tell many people about my plans. I mentioned it briefly to our parents, who were on a long-planned trip to Europe, celebrating their 40th anniversary. In retrospect, I realized Natalie must have heard about my plans from them. All I wanted was peace and quiet, 2 weeks of fishing, reading on the deck, and decompressing from months of intensive coding projects. I had no idea that those plans were about to collide with the worst family betrayal I'd ever experienced. The drive to the lake house was supposed to be the beginning of my relaxation. 6 hours on the road with my favorite podcasts playing, the stress of the city gradually melting away with each mile. I stopped at my usual grocery store about 30 minutes from the lake, stocking up on 2 weeks' worth of supplies, steaks for grilling, local beer, fresh vegetables, and enough coffee to fuel my early morning fishing plans. As I turned onto the private road leading to my property, I noticed something odd, tire tracks in the gravel that didn't match my car. I hadn't had visitors since my buddy Tom came up for a fishing weekend 2 months ago. Still, I didn't think much of it. Maybe the property management company I hired for occasional checks had stopped by. Then I saw them 3 cars parked in my driveway. A red Jeep I recognized as Derek's, a blue sedan I didn't recognize, and a white SUV with Massachusetts plates. My stomach dropped as I pulled up behind them, blocking the Jeep in. Something was very wrong. Through the large front windows, I could see lights on inside, and movement multiple people. This wasn't a break-in. Whoever was there had made themselves at home. I grabbed my duffel bag and groceries and headed toward the front door, a mixture of confusion and anger building with each step. As I approached, I could hear music and laughter. Using my key, I tried to unlock the door, but the key wouldn't turn. That's when I realized the deadbolt was engaged, a lock I rarely used, since it required a different key that I kept in a drawer inside. I knocked firmly. The music volume dropped, and I heard hushed voices. Finally, footsteps approached, and the curtain on the door window moved aside. Natalie's face appeared, transitioning from alarm to recognition to most disturbingly amusement. "Harvey, what are you doing here?" she asked through the closed door, as if I was the unexpected visitor. "What am I doing here?" "This is my house, Natalie. What are you doing here?" I replied, struggling to keep my voice level. She opened the door a few inches, the security chain still engaged. "Mom and Dad mentioned you weren't using the place for a while, so we thought we'd stay for a bit. Our apartment situation fell through." "They said no such thing," I responded, feeling my patience evaporating. "I specifically told them I was taking vacation time to come up here. I'm here for 2 weeks, starting today." Derek appeared behind Natalie, a beer in hand, my craft beer, I noticed, from the refrigerator I'd stocked on my last visit. "Hey man," he said with a smirk. "Slight misunderstanding. But we're all settled in now. We're kind of house-sitting for you." House-sitting? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I never asked for a house-sitter. "This is my vacation. You need to pack up and leave." Natalie's face hardened. "You always were so selfish, Harvey. You have this huge house all to yourself, and you can't even let your sister stay when she needs help? Remember when Mom and Dad said you should share your toys? We're not children anymore, and this isn't a toy. This is my home that I worked for years to afford," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Looking past them, I could see 2 other people lounging on my leather sofa, a man and a woman I didn't recognize. My fishing gear had been moved from its careful storage place and piled haphazardly in the corner. Empty beer bottles littered the coffee table I'd custom-ordered from a local woodworker. "Look," I said, trying a different approach. I've been planning this vacation for months. I need this break. You can stay at my apartment in the city if you need a place. Derek laughed. Your place in the city? That tiny box? No thanks, man. We're good here. He took a long swig of my beer. Besides, we told some friends they could come up this weekend. Can't cancel on them now? I tried to push the door open. This isn't a discussion. This is my property, and I'm telling you to leave. Derek pushed back, his 6'2" frame easily overpowering my attempt. Don't make this ugly, bro. We're family, right? Family doesn't do this to each other. I snapped back. By this point, their friends had wandered over, curious about the confrontation. One of them, a tall guy with a sleeve tattoo, looked uncomfortable with the situation. The woman, however, seemed amused by the whole thing. Harvey, Natalie said with exaggerated patience, as if explaining something to a child. You always said we could use the lake house any time. Remember? At Mom and Dad's anniversary? I stared at her in disbelief. What I'd actually said was they could join me at the lake sometime, not take over my house without permission. That's not what I said, and you know it, I replied. Now, open this door. I've been driving all day, I have groceries melting in my car, and I want to get into my own house. Natalie exchanged glances with Derek, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then she shrugged and closed the door completely. Sorry, Harvey, she called through the door. We've got plans this weekend. Maybe call next time before you drive all the way up here? I stood there in shock, grocery bags growing heavy in my arms. Natalie, open the door right now, I shouted, pounding on it with my free hand. Through the window, I could see her walking away, rejoining her friends in the living room. Derek lingered, giving me a smug look before drawing the curtains closed. The music volume increased again. I set down my bags and tried calling Natalie's phone. I could hear it ringing inside, but she declined the call. I tried 3 more times with the same result. I texted her, "This is ridiculous. Open the door now." After 10 minutes of knocking, calling, and texting with no response, I walked around the perimeter of the house, looking through windows. What I saw made my blood boil. They had completely taken over clothes strewn across my bedroom, makeup on my bathroom counter, unfamiliar luggage piled in the guest room. In the kitchen, they'd pushed my organized pantry items aside to make room for junk food and more alcohol. As dusk approached, I returned to the front door for one more attempt. This time, Natalie came to the window, opened it a crack, and said with a laugh, "Sleep in your car, Harvey." Then she pulled the curtain shut again, her laughter joined by others inside. I stood there, humiliated and enraged, as the reality of my situation sank in. My own sister had locked me out of my house, the house I'd sacrificed years of my life to afford, and was now partying inside with her friends at my expense. The night spent in my car was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my life, both physically and emotionally. My sedan wasn't designed for sleeping. The seat reclined only so far, and at 6 feet tall, I had to curl my legs awkwardly to fit. The temperature dropped into the 40s, typical for a New Hampshire spring night. I had a light jacket but no blanket, and the decision to run the heater meant waking every 30 minutes to start the engine again, worried about draining the battery. But the physical discomfort paled in comparison to the emotional turmoil. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Natalie's mocking face at the window. "Sleep in your car, Harvey." The casual cruelty from my own sister, someone I'd grown up with, shared childhood memories with, left me stunned. Despite our different paths in life, I never imagined she could treat me this way. Throughout the night, the party continued inside my house. The bass from their music vibrated through the windows, and occasionally I heard loud laughter or shouting. Twice, people came outside to smoke on my deck, their conversations carrying through the quiet night air. They were discussing plans for the weekend using my boat, having a barbecue with more friends coming. All in my house, with my possessions, without my permission. I tried calling Natalie several more times, each call going straight to voicemail after the first ring. I left increasingly stern messages. "Natalie, this is completely unacceptable. Let me in now." Then, "You are trespassing in my home. This is illegal. And finally, if you don't open this door by morning, I'm calling the police. I tried our parents too, but with the time difference in Europe, it was the middle of the night for them. I left a brief message asking them to call as soon as possible, not wanting to ruin their anniversary trip but desperate for some intervention. Sleep came in brief, uncomfortable snatches. By dawn, I was stiff, cold, hungry, and more resolved than ever to reclaim my property. I watched the sunrise over the lake, the peaceful scene, a stark contrast to my inner turmoil, and waited until I saw movement inside the house. At around 8 in the morning, I approached the front door again and knocked firmly. Derek answered, looking disheveled and hungover but no less smug than the day before. "Morning, bro," he said, not opening the door beyond a crack. "You actually slept in your car? That's dedication." "This has gone on long enough," I said, my voice hoarse from the cold night. "Let me in my house now, or I'm calling the authorities." Something dangerous flashed in Derek's eyes. He opened the door wider and stepped partially out, using his larger frame to intimidate me. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice low. "You call the cops, and we'll tell them you gave us permission to stay here. It's your word against ours, and there are 4 of us and 1 of you." "This is my property," I insisted. "I have the deed, the mortgage statements, and we have texts," Derek interrupted, "where you told Natalie family is always welcome here. Besides, how do you think it'll look you trying to put your own sister out on the street? You want to be that guy? The one who calls the cops on family?" He was manipulating me, and I knew it, but his words still hit a nerve. Would the police even take this seriously? Would they see it as a family dispute rather than trespassing? "At least let me in to get some of my things," I tried. "Can't do that," Derek said with mock regret. "We've changed the security code on your fancy smart lock. For safety, you understand. Too many keys floating around." My smart lock, the secondary entrance through the side door that I'd installed for convenience, had a keypad code. The realization that they'd not only locked me out but taken the time to hack into my security system sent a new wave of violation through me. As Derek retreated inside, I walked around the property, assessing the situation. What I saw deepened my sense of betrayal. My boat, a small fishing vessel I'd saved 3 years for, had been moved from its careful covering. Empty beer cans littered the dock. The custom outdoor kitchen area showed signs of a careless cookout, with dried food stuck to the grill and expensive utensils left out in the morning dew. Looking through windows, I could see more evidence that they'd been there longer than just overnight. Mail had piled up on the counter at least a week's worth. My carefully organized bookcases had been disarranged. Plants I'd left thriving were now drooping from neglect. As the morning progressed, I observed a disturbing pattern of disrespect for my property. 2 more friends arrived, greeted enthusiastically by Natalie. They unloaded more alcohol and what looked like party supplies. Through the window, I watched as someone carelessly moved my collection of framed photographs to make room for a portable speaker, knocking one to the floor where the glass cracked. By midday, they had moved the party outdoors to the deck and dock area. I approached cautiously, hoping Natalie might be more reasonable without Derek immediately present. She was lounging on one of my patio chairs, scrolling through her phone while her friends played music from a Bluetooth speaker. "Natalie, we need to talk," I said, keeping my distance to avoid appearing confrontational. She looked up, squinting against the sundae. "Still here, Harvey? I figured you'd have driven back to your apartment by now." "This is my house," I said simply. "The house I worked 60-hour weeks for years to afford. The house I make mortgage payments on every month. How can you do this to me?" For a brief moment, something like shame flickered across her face. Then she hardened again. "You were always the responsible one, weren't you? Mom and Dad's perfect child, always making me feel like I was doing everything wrong." "This isn't about childhood rivalry," I said. "This is about basic respect for other people's property." "Property, property, property," she mimicked. "That's all you care about. Things. Meanwhile, your own sister needed a place to stay after being evicted, and you couldn't even be bothered to answer her calls." This was revisionist history. She'd texted about financial troubles but never directly asked to stay at the lake house, and even if she had, this ambush and hostile takeover would still be completely inappropriate. One of Natalie's friends, a woman with short blonde hair who'd been quietly listening, stood up awkwardly. "Maybe I should go," she said, looking uncomfortable. "Jordan and I can drive back to the city." "Nonsense," Natalie replied sharply. "Harvey was just leaving. Again, he has a perfectly good apartment in Boston." I addressed the friend directly. "I'm Harvey, the owner of this house. I didn't invite anyone to stay here. I'm being locked out of my own property." The woman, Jordan, apparently had the decency to look embarrassed, I thought. Natalie said this was a family vacation house that everyone shares. Before I could respond, Derek emerged from the house carrying an expensive bottle of scotch. I'd been saving a gift from a client. "Hey, found the good stuff," he announced, either oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the tense conversation. I watched in horror as he carelessly poured generous portions into plastic cups. That was a $200 bottle of 18-year scotch, meant to be sipped and appreciated. I retreated to my car, realizing that direct confrontation wasn't working. I needed to regroup and consider my options. In town, I found a small diner where I could charge my phone, get some food, and clear my head. I tried our parents again, still no answer. I researched tenant laws, wondering if they could claim some kind of squatter's rights. But everything I found confirmed that they had no legal right to be there without my permission. Returning to the house in the late afternoon, I found the situation had escalated further. 2 more cars had arrived, a total of 7 people now occupying my house. Music blared from inside, and I could smell marijuana drifting from the open windows. On the lake, someone was using my boat recklessly, speeding too close to the shoreline. Through the side window, I glimpsed something that made my stomach drop. In the den where I kept my most prized possessions, Derek was handling my grandfather's handcrafted fishing rods. These weren't just any fishing rods. They were irreplaceable family heirlooms, handmade by my grandfather over decades of craftsmanship. I displayed them carefully on custom wall mounts, never even using them out of respect for their sentimental value. Derek was gesturing with one, making some kind of joke to his friends, swinging it carelessly like it was a toy. As I watched in horror, he pretended to cast it inside the house, nearly hitting the ceiling fan. That was the moment something broke inside me. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about respect, about family legacy, about the fundamental violation of everything I valued. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. With renewed determination, I tried calling our parents one more time. "This time," my mother answered, sounding groggy from the time difference. "Harvey, is everything all right?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, though my voice shook with suppressed anger. "Natalie and Derek have taken over the lake house. They've locked me out, changed my security codes, and they're using and damaging my things. I spent last night sleeping in my car." There was a long pause. "That doesn't sound like something your sister would do," my mother finally said, doubt clear in her tone. "Mom, I'm standing outside my own house right now, watching strangers use my property while Natalie and Derek party inside. They told me to sleep in my car. This is happening." I heard my father's voice in the background, asking questions. After some muffled conversation, my mother returned. "We'll try calling Natalie to sort this out. There must be some misunderstanding." "Maybe she thought you weren't coming until later?" "There's no misunderstanding," I insisted. "They know exactly what they're doing. They've been here for at least a week based on the mail piled up." "Let us talk to her," my mother said placatingly. "I'm sure we can resolve this without any drama. In the meantime, could you perhaps stay at a hotel? We'll reimburse you, of course." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So your solution is for me to pay for a hotel while trespassers occupy the house I own and worked years to afford?" "They're not trespassers, Harvey. They're family," my mother replied, a note of reproach in her voice. "This hostile attitude isn't helping." The conversation continued in this vein, with my parents reluctant to accept the severity of the situation or to firmly side with me against Natalie. They promised to call her, but their parting advice was essentially to work it out like adults and remember she's your sister. After hanging up, I felt more alone than ever. The pattern established in childhood was continuing. Natalie could do no wrong, and I was expected to be the bigger person, to sacrifice my comfort and rights for the sake of family harmony. I decided to try one more approach before escalating further. When I spotted Jordan, the uncomfortable friend, heading to her car alone, I approached her. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my distance to avoid appearing threatening. "Jordan, right? Could I talk to you for a minute?" She glanced nervously toward the house. "I don't want to get involved in family drama." "I understand," I said. "But I need to know, did Natalie tell you this was her house? Did she explain that she's locked the actual owner out?" Jordan shifted uncomfortably. "She said it was a family lake house that everyone uses, that you were being selfish about sharing it." She hesitated. "But the way Derek is treating your things, it didn't feel right. That's why I'm leaving early." "Would you be willing to tell that to the police if I have to call them?" I asked. Her eyes widened. "Police? No, I can't get involved like that. I'm sorry about your situation, but—" She hurried to her car without finishing her sentence. Next, I tried calling a locksmith, explaining that I was locked out of my own house. The first one seemed willing to help, until I explained the full situation, that other people were inside who wouldn't let me in. "Sorry, sir. That sounds like a domestic dispute," the locksmith said. "I can't get involved without proof of ownership and confirmation that you have the right to remove these people." "I have proof of ownership," I replied. "Deed, mortgage statements, ID with this address. But these people inside, their family, you said. They could claim they're tenants or have permission to be there. You need to handle this through proper legal channels." 2 more locksmiths gave me similar responses. Without a clear emergency like a child locked inside, they were unwilling to help with what appeared to be a complex situation. Growing increasingly frustrated, I drove into town again, needing space to think and a decent meal after my night in the car. At a local cafe, I researched my options online. Everything pointed to involving law enforcement, but Derek's threat lingered in my mind. "It's your word against ours. Would the police even take this seriously?" When I returned to the house in the early evening, the situation had deteriorated further. The driveway now contained 5 vehicles. Music thumped loudly enough that I could hear it from the road. People I'd never seen before wandered between the house and the lakefront. I parked at the edge of the property and walked closer, trying to assess what was happening. Through the windows, I could see at least 10 people inside. My dining table had been repurposed for beer pong. Someone was mixing drinks at my kitchen island, spilling liquid carelessly onto the granite countertops I'd selected so carefully. On the deck, a group was smoking, flicking ashes onto the wooden boards I'd refinished by hand last summer. Near the dock, someone had dragged my expensive patio furniture down to the water's edge, where it was never meant to be placed. Moving around to the side of the house for a better view of the den, I witnessed something that made my blood run cold. Derek and 2 men I didn't recognize were examining my grandfather's antique tackle box, a hand-carved wooden case containing lures and fishing equipment dating back to the 1940s. They were passing around the contents, laughing at the old-fashioned equipment, handling irreplaceable antique lures like they were toys. As I watched in horror, one of them dropped a delicate hand-tied fly on the floor and carelessly stepped on it. Derek opened a compartment in the box too forcefully, cracking the aged wood along a seam. My heart pounding, I circled back to the front of the house and pounded on the door. When no one answered, I moved to the windows, knocking on the glass to get someone's attention. Finally, a stranger opened the door, music blasting behind him. "Yeah?" he asked, clearly intoxicated. "I need to speak with Natalie or Derek," I said firmly. "I'm the owner of this house." "Owner?" The guy looked confused. "Hold on." He disappeared inside, leaving the door ajar. Minutes later, Derek appeared, swaying slightly, a drink in his hand. "Harvey, decided to join the party after all?" His words slurred together, eyes unfocused. "You're damaging my grandfather's fishing equipment," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "That tackle box is a family heirloom." Derek shrugged, "Just having a little fun with the old junk. No harm done." "It's not junk. It's irreplaceable, and you're destroying it. You need to leave. All of you. Now. Or what? Derek stepped closer, using his height to loom over me. You gonna make us? I stood my ground. If necessary, I'll involve the authorities. The cops? Derek laughed. For what? A family disagreement about some old fishing gear? Over Derek's shoulder, I could see into the house. On the coffee table, something caught my eye: small plastic bags, white powder, and what looked like drug paraphernalia. My lake house had become not just the site of an unauthorized party, but potentially a place where illegal activities were occurring. Derek followed my gaze and quickly moved to block my view. You should go now, Harvey. This isn't your scene anyway. Always were a straight arrow, weren't you? As he moved to close the door, I caught a glimpse of Natalie in the background. Our eyes met briefly, and I expected to see some remorse, some recognition of how wrong this situation was. Instead, she raised her glass in a mocking toast before turning away. The door closed in my face, the lock clicking with finality. I stood there for a moment, trembling with a mixture of rage and despair. Then I walked back to my car, took out my phone, and made a decision that would permanently alter my relationship with my sister. I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. I need to report trespassers at my property, I said, trying to keep my own voice steady. My sister and her husband have broken into my lake house, changed the locks, and are refusing to let me in. They're damaging my property, and I believe there may be illegal drugs inside. Are you currently at the property, sir? Yes. I'm in my car in the driveway. I spent last night sleeping here because they won't let me inside my own home. And you're certain this is your property? You have proof of ownership? Absolutely. I have the deed, mortgage statements, and my driver's license with this address. This is my primary residence that I purchased 3 years ago. The dispatcher took down all the relevant information: my name, the address, the number of people inside, and whether any weapons were involved. None that I knew of. She assured me that officers would be dispatched to my location. Please remain in your vehicle until the officers arrive, she instructed. Don't approach the house or confront anyone inside. I agreed, thanked her, and ended the call. Then I sat in my car, watching the house. A strange mixture of emotions washing over me: relief that action was finally being taken, anxiety about the confrontation to come, and deep sadness that my relationship with my sister had deteriorated to this point. 20 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled up behind me, lights flashing but sirens off. 4 officers emerged, 2 men and 2 women. I stepped out of my car to meet them, hands visible to avoid any misunderstandings. Mr. Wilson? The lead officer approached, introducing himself as Officer Paul Jackson. I understand you're reporting trespassers at your residence? Yes, that's right, I confirmed. Then explained the situation in detail, how I'd arrived for a planned vacation to find my sister and her husband had moved in without permission, changed locks, and refused to let me enter. I showed them my driver's license with the property address, pulled up electronic copies of my mortgage statements and deed on my phone, and even had photos on my phone of me at the house from previous visits. Officer Jackson listened carefully, then asked, "And you mentioned possible drug use?" "Yes, I saw what appeared to be drugs and paraphernalia on my coffee table when the door was briefly opened." A female officer, who introduced herself as Officer Samantha Reynolds, asked, "Have you had any prior agreements with your sister about using the property? Any arrangement that might have given her the impression she had permission to be here?" "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "I've occasionally invited her to join me here for weekends, but always with me present. I never gave her a key or permission to stay here without me, especially not to take over the house and lock me out." The officers conferred briefly. Then Officer Jackson turned to me. "All right, Mr. Wilson. Based on your documentation and statement, we'll approach the residence and speak with the occupants. Please wait here by your vehicle." I watched as all 4 officers approached my front door. Officer Jackson knocked firmly, announcing, "Police Department. Open the door, please." The music inside suddenly cut off. Through the windows I could see people moving quickly, some disappearing from view. After what seemed like an eternity but was probably less than a minute, Derek opened the door partially. Even from a distance, I could hear him trying to smooth-talk the officers. "Evening, officers. Is there a problem?" "Sir, we're responding to a report from the property owner that unauthorized individuals are occupying this residence," Officer Jackson stated. "Are you the owner of this property?" "No, but we're family of the owner," Derek replied confidently. "My wife's brother owns it, but he said we could stay here whenever we wanted. It's a family place." "Is your wife present?" Officer Reynolds asked. Derek hesitated, then called over his shoulder, "Natalie, police want to talk to you." Moments later, Natalie appeared at the door, looking considerably more sober than she had earlier. She smiled at the officers, the picture of innocence. "Hello, officers. What seems to be the problem?" Officer Jackson got straight to the point. "Ma'am, your brother Harvey Wilson has identified himself as the sole owner of this property. He states that you are here without his permission and have denied him entry to his own home. Is this accurate?" Natalie's smile faltered slightly. "There's been a misunderstanding. Harvey always said family could use the lake house. We're just taking him up on that offer." "Did he specifically give you permission to be here now, without him present, and to deny him entry when he arrived?" Officer Reynolds pressed. "Well, not exactly, but—" "Ma'am," Officer Jackson interrupted. "Mr. Wilson has provided proof of ownership and states he never gave you permission to occupy the property without him, much less to lock him out. Based on that information, you and everyone inside need to vacate the premises immediately." Derek stepped forward aggressively. "This is ridiculous. We're family. You can't kick family out on the word of one person. He's just being selfish because we're having fun without him." "Sir, please step back," one of the other officers warned. "Property ownership is not determined by family relationship. If Mr. Wilson is the legal owner and has not given you permission to be here, you are trespassing." Natalie tried a different approach, her voice taking on a wounded tone. "Officers, my brother and I had a verbal agreement. He's just angry because we had a few friends over. If you could just let us talk to him." "You've had plenty of time to talk to him," Officer Reynolds pointed out. "According to his statement, he arrived yesterday and you refused him entry, forcing him to sleep in his car. While this conversation was occurring, I noticed the other two officers had moved to positions where they could see more of the house interior. One of them gestured to Officer Jackson, who then asked, "Ma'am, sir, we need to enter the residence. Do we have your permission, or do we need to proceed differently?" "You can't just come in here," Derek protested. "You need a warrant or something." "Actually, sir, we have the property owner's permission," Officer Jackson replied calmly. "And based on what my colleague has observed through the window, we have reasonable cause." I couldn't see exactly what the officer had spotted, but Derek's face changed instantly. He tried to close the door, but Officer Jackson blocked it with his foot. "Step outside, sir. Now." What followed was a flurry of activity. The officers entered the house, instructing everyone inside to move to the front yard. One by one, Natalie and Derek's friends emerged, looking varying degrees of embarrassed, defiant, or intoxicated. I counted 11 people total, far more than I'd initially estimated. From my position by my car, I could hear the officers inside, their voices carrying through the open door as they conducted what appeared to be a search. "There's drug paraphernalia in plain view on the coffee table," one called out, "and what looks like cocaine residue." Another officer emerged briefly, speaking into her radio, apparently requesting additional units. Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived. The tension in the front yard was palpable. Natalie stood with her arms crossed, alternating between glaring at me and whispering frantically to Derek. Most of their friends kept their distance from them, clearly wanting no part of the escalating situation. Officer Reynolds emerged from the house, approaching Derek with a serious expression. "Sir, we've found illegal substances inside the residence. Who does this belong to?" Derek immediately pointed to one of his friends. "That must be Taylor's. We don't do drugs." The friend Taylor apparently looked shocked. "What? No way, man. You're the one who brought that stuff." The situation deteriorated rapidly from there. Derek began yelling at Taylor, then at the officers when they tried to separate them. When Officer Jackson placed a hand on Derek's shoulder to guide him away from the confrontation, Derek shoved him a critical error. "Sir, you're under arrest for assaulting a police officer," Officer Jackson announced, quickly restraining Derek with handcuffs as he continued to struggle and shout. The expression on Derek's face as the handcuffs clicked closed was one of utter disbelief. This clearly wasn't how he had expected the evening to go. The smug confidence that had characterized his treatment of me vanished, replaced by panic. Natalie watched in horror as her husband was led to a patrol car. "Derek!" she cried, moving toward him before being stopped by an officer. "Ma'am, please stay where you are," the officer instructed firmly. Turning to me, Natalie's face contorted with anger. "This is your fault. You called the cops on your own family. How could you do this to us?" Before I could respond, Officer Reynolds approached Natalie. "Ma'am, we need to ask you some questions about the substances found inside." What followed was a tense conversation, with Natalie initially claiming complete ignorance about any drugs. However, when informed that multiple witnesses had already given statements implicating both her and Derek, her story began to change. "It was just a little party," she insisted, her voice taking on a pleading quality. "Things got out of hand, but we weren't hurting anyone. You were trespassing in someone else's home and denying the rightful owner access to his property," Officer Reynolds pointed out. "Additionally, there's evidence of controlled substances and what appears to be significant damage to the interior." As if on cue, another officer emerged from the house holding my grandfather's damaged tackle box. "Sir," he called to me, "could you identify this item?" The sight of the broken family heirloom sent a wave of grief through me. "That's my grandfather's handmade tackle box," I confirmed. "It's irreplaceable." The officer nodded, cataloging it as evidence of property damage. The next moments passed in a blur. Natalie was placed in handcuffs as well, charged with trespassing and possession. Two of their friends, including Taylor, were also arrested on drug charges. The others were identified, given warnings about trespassing, and told to leave the property immediately. As Natalie was led to a separate patrol car, she looked over at me one last time. The anger in her eyes had given way to something else. Fear, perhaps, or the dawning realization of consequences. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the night spent in my car, the mocking laughter, the casual destruction of my belongings and family heirlooms. "Mr. Wilson," Officer Jackson approached me. "We'll need to take statements from you about the property damage and trespassing. But first, let's get you back into your home." Those words, "your home," brought an unexpected lump to my throat. After the ordeal of the past 24 hours, the prospect of reclaiming my space felt both relieving and overwhelming. As the patrol cars containing Natalie and Derek pulled away, I stood in my driveway watching, a complex mixture of emotions washing over me. This wasn't how I'd imagined my vacation beginning, and certainly not how I'd expected my relationship with my sister to evolve. But as one chapter closed, another was about to begin, the challenging process of reclaiming and restoring both my property and my sense of security. The moment I stepped back into my house felt surreal. Less than 36 hours earlier, I had arrived expecting a peaceful vacation, only to be locked out of my own property. Now I was back inside, but the space no longer felt like the sanctuary I had created. The destruction was worse than I'd imagined. Beer stains marked my hardwood floors. Cigarette burns dotted the custom-built coffee table. The kitchen was a disaster zone. Dirty dishes piled everywhere, food left to rot on counters, and what looked like wine splashed across the backsplash I'd painstakingly installed myself. Officer Reynolds walked through with me, documenting the damage for her report. "You'll want to take photos of everything," she advised, "for insurance purposes and in case you decide to pursue civil damages." I nodded numbly, pulling out my phone to begin the grim catalog. In the living room, my entertainment system had been tampered with, wires hanging haphazardly, where someone had apparently tried to disconnect components. The rug, a hand-woven piece I'd splurged on to tie the room together, was stained with what smelled like spilled beer and who knows what else. The bedrooms were equally violated. My primary bedroom had been completely taken over by Natalie and Derek, their clothes strewn everywhere, makeup stains on my custom bedding, and what appeared to be cigarette ash on the nightstand. The guest rooms were in similar states of disarray, with unfamiliar luggage and belongings scattered throughout. In the bathroom, my towels had been used and left in damp piles on the floor. Expensive toiletries I kept for guests had been used up or left open to dry out. Someone had apparently tried to flush something inappropriate, as the toilet was clogged and had overflowed at some point, water damage visible on the floor tiles. But the most painful discovery was in the den, my personal sanctuary. The damage to my grandfather's fishing equipment was even worse than I'd glimpsed through the window. The tackle box had a crack running through its handcrafted lid. Several of the delicate hand-tied flies were crushed or missing altogether. 2 of the fishing rods had been snapped, irreparably damaged. These were my grandfather's, I explained to Officer Reynolds, my voice tight. He made them himself over a lifetime of fishing. They can't be replaced. She nodded sympathetically, taking detailed notes and photos. We'll make sure this is all documented for the charges. The inventory of damage and missing items took hours. Among the items I couldn't locate, a valuable watch my father had given me for my 30th birthday, several bottles of high-end liquor, a small collection of silver fishing lures I'd been gifted by a grateful client, and about $200 in cash I'd kept in a drawer for emergencies. By the time we finished, it was past midnight. The officers had been thorough and professional throughout the process. We'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow to complete your statement, Officer Jackson informed me. In the meantime, you might want to consider changing your locks. I thanked them for their help, a phrase that felt inadequate given how they'd helped me reclaim my home and saw them out. Then I stood alone in my living room, surrounded by the wreckage of what should have been my vacation retreat. Too exhausted to begin cleaning, I found the least damaged guest room, stripped the bedding, and replaced it with clean sheets from the linen closet. I took a long, hot shower, scrubbing away the grime and stress of sleeping in my car, then collapsed into bed. Despite my exhaustion, sleep didn't come easily. Every creak and settling noise in the house startled me awake, the sense of violation still fresh and raw. The next morning, I called a locksmith, first thing a different one from those I'd contacted before. He arrived promptly, sympathetic to my situation after hearing a condensed version of events. Happens more often than you'd think, he said, as he worked on replacing the locks. Family disputes over property can get ugly. He replaced both the standard locks and the smart lock system, ensuring I was the only one with access. The sense of security that returned with each new lock installation was palpable. Next, I called my parents. They had tried reaching me several times during the police intervention, but my phone had been on silent. The conversation was difficult. Initially, they expressed shock and disbelief at what had happened. "Arrested? Natalie?" my mother repeated, her voice shaking. "There must be some mistake." I explained the situation again, detailing the destruction of property and the drugs found in the house. My father, usually the more level-headed of the two, seemed to grasp the severity more quickly. "I'm sorry, son," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment in Natalie, not in me. I realized with some relief. We had no idea things had gotten this bad with them. We knew they were having financial problems, but this, my mother was more conflicted. "Couldn't you have handled it differently? Called us first instead of the police? She's your sister, Harvey." "Mom," I said firmly, "I tried calling you. I tried reasoning with them. They locked me out of my own home, forced me to sleep in my car, and destroyed irreplaceable family heirlooms. What would you have had me do?" The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Finally, my father said, "We'll be cutting our trip short. We should be home by tomorrow evening. We'll deal with this as a family." After the call ended, I felt a mixture of emotions: relief that they seemed to understand the severity, frustration that my mother still partially blamed me, and sadness that our parents' anniversary trip was now ruined as well. The rest of the day was spent cleaning, documenting, and trying to restore order to my home. I filled 3 large garbage bags with empty bottles, food containers, and debris. I scrubbed floors, counters, and bathrooms until my hands were raw. Some stains wouldn't come out without professional help, and some items were damaged beyond repair. But the physical activity of cleaning helped channel my anger and distress into something productive. In the afternoon, I drove to the police station to complete my statement. The process was straightforward, but emotionally draining, requiring me to recount the entire experience in detail. I learned that Natalie and Derek were both still in custody, facing multiple charges: trespassing, property damage, possession of controlled substances, and in Derek's case, assaulting an officer. Their friends had been processed and released, with court dates set for the drug charges. What happens next? I asked the officer handling my case. They'll have a bail hearing likely tomorrow, he explained. Given the charges and the property damage, I expect the judge will set bail. Whether they can post it depends on their financial situation. I nodded, wondering if my parents would bail them out, and how I felt about that possibility. You should also know, the officer continued, that we found evidence suggesting they may have been involved in other activities beyond what we initially observed. What kind of activities? I asked, a new wave of dread washing over me. There were multiple sets of identification in their possessions, not just their own, and correspondence suggesting they may have been using your address to receive mail fraudulently. Our fraud department is looking into it. This new information hit me like a physical blow. The violation went deeper than I'd realized. They hadn't just used my house for a party, they may have been using my identity and address for who knows what purposes. Returning to the lake house, I found a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. It was Martin, my nearest neighbor, about a quarter-mile down the lake shore. Harvey, it's Martin. Just checking if everything's okay. Saw all the police activity last night. Give me a call when you can. I returned his call, grateful for the concern of a friendly voice. Martin was a 72-year-old retired school teacher who had lived on the lake for decades. We weren't close friends, but we'd shared fishing tips and the occasional beer on summer evenings. Those people were there for at least 10 days. Martin told me after I explained the situation. I thought they were guests of yours at first. Then I saw them using your boat recklessly, almost hitting a swimmer last weekend. I tried calling you but couldn't get through. This was new information. My sister and her husband had apparently been living in my house, using my possessions, for over a week before I arrived. The level of premeditation was staggering. If you need a witness statement for the police or insurance, I'm happy to provide one, Martin offered. I have security cameras that cover part of the lake. Might have caught them on the boat. I thanked him profusely, taking down his contact information to pass along to the police. His call reminded me that I needed to contact my insurance company as well, to see what damage might be covered. That evening, as I sat on my deck watching the sunset over the lake, trying to recapture some of the peace this place usually brought me, my phone rang again. It was my father. We've spoken to Natalie, he said, his voice tired and strained. She's not taking responsibility for her actions. She still claims you overreacted, that this was all a misunderstanding. I wasn't surprised. Natalie had spent a lifetime avoiding consequences for her actions. Why start accepting responsibility now? The bail hearing is tomorrow, my father continued. Your mother and I have discussed it, and we've decided not to post bail for them. They need to understand the seriousness of what they've done. This decision surprised me. Throughout our childhood, our parents had always cushioned Natalie from the consequences of her actions. This was the first time they were allowing her to face the results of her choices directly. Thank you, I said simply, emotion making it difficult to say more. We'll be home tomorrow evening, he replied. We'll face this together. As the call ended, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: vindication, sadness, and a strange sense of relief. For the first time, it seemed that my parents were seeing Natalie clearly, without the rose-colored glasses they'd worn throughout our childhood. I spent the next few days in a limbo state dealing with insurance adjusters, cleaning what I could, replacing what needed immediate replacement, and trying to salvage what remained of my planned vacation. The peace and relaxation I'd sought seemed impossible now, but I was determined not to let Natalie and Derek rob me of any more time at my lake house. The legal process moved forward. Natalie and Derek remained in custody for 3 days, before being released on bail posted not by our parents, but by Derek's cousin apparently. They were ordered to stay away from my property and to have no contact with me pending trial. My parents arrived as promised, staying at a hotel nearby rather than with me, a thoughtful choice that I appreciated, needing space to process everything. They visited the lake house and saw the damage firsthand, my mother weeping at the destruction of my grandfather's fishing equipment. "I never thought she could do something like this," my mother said softly. "Where did we go wrong with her?" I had no answer for that. The question had haunted me for years, watching Natalie's choices become increasingly self-destructive. 2 weeks later, I attended their court appearance. The evidence against them was overwhelming, including testimony from their own friends who had been present. Derek's lawyer attempted to paint the situation as a family misunderstanding blown out of proportion, but the judge wasn't buying it. "Family relationships do not override property rights," the judge stated firmly. "The defendant's actions constitute criminal trespassing, property damage, and in Mr. Reynolds' case, assault on a peace officer. They both pleaded guilty to reduced charges, accepting plea deals that included probation, mandatory community service, and court-ordered restitution for the property damage. The fraud investigation was ongoing, with additional charges possible, depending on what the Financial Crimes Unit discovered. Throughout the proceedings, Natalie never once looked at me directly. Her face remained set in a mask of defiance and entitlement, showing no remorse for her actions. Derek alternated between sullen silence and whispered conferences with his attorney. As they were led out of the courtroom, Natalie finally glanced in my direction. There was no apology in her eyes, no recognition of the pain she'd caused, only resentment that her actions had finally caught up with her. I left the courthouse feeling hollow rather than victorious. The legal system had worked as intended, providing consequences for their actions, but it couldn't restore the trust that had been broken or replace the irreplaceable items that had been damaged. The road ahead would be challenging, rebuilding my sanctuary, processing my feelings about my sister, establishing new boundaries with my family. But as I drove back to the lake house, my house, reclaimed and secured, I felt the first tentative steps toward healing beginning to take shape. 6 months have passed since the night I slept in my car, locked out of my own lake house by my sister. The physical restoration of my home is nearly complete. New locks, security cameras, and an upgraded alarm system provide the tangible security I now realize I should have installed from the beginning. Fresh paint covers the walls where careless guests left scuffs and stains. New furniture replaces the pieces that were damaged beyond repair. To a casual visitor, the house looks better than ever. But the invisible restoration, the reclaiming of this space as my sanctuary, has been a more gradual process. For the first few weeks after the incident, I jumped at every unexpected sound. I double-checked locks before going to bed. I kept the outside lights on all night. The sense of violation lingered long after the physical evidence had been cleaned away. On the recommendation of a friend, I found a therapist, Jeffrey, who specializes in family trauma. Our weekly sessions have been invaluable in processing the complex emotions this betrayal stirred up. "Family betrayal cuts deeper than any other kind," he explained during our first session. "The people we expect to have our backs are the ones who can hurt us most profoundly when they don't." One of Jeffrey's suggestions was particularly helpful, a cleansing ritual to reclaim my space. It might sound new agey for a practical software developer like me, but walking through each room with sage, setting intentions for the space, and literally speaking aloud, my ownership of it had a surprisingly powerful effect on my psyche. The lake house began to feel like mine again, not a space that had been invaded and violated. The legal aftermath continued to unfold over the months. The restitution payments from Natalie and Derek began arriving irregularly at first, then more consistently after the court threatened further action. The money helps with the tangible damages, but no amount can replace my grandfather's handcrafted fishing equipment or restore my sense of family trust. The fraud investigation revealed another layer to their betrayal. They had indeed been using my address to receive credit card offers and open accounts in names that weren't theirs. The scheme wasn't sophisticated, but it was deliberate, and it had been going on for months before they occupied my lake house. Additional charges were filed, extending their probation and adding financial penalties. My own credit suffered collateral damage, requiring months of calls and paperwork to untangle. My parents have been on their own journey of reckoning. After a lifetime of enabling Natalie's behavior, they've had to face the consequences of those patterns. My father took it harder than my mother, perhaps because he recognized himself in Natalie's entitlement. I never said no to her, he confessed during a difficult conversation on my deck, 3 months after the incident. I thought I was being loving, but I was just teaching her that rules didn't apply to her. My mother struggled longer with enabling tendencies, making excuses for Natalie's behavior even after seeing the destruction firsthand. But a conversation with my therapist, who offered a family session when I was ready, seemed to break through some of her denial. "Your daughter made choices," Jeffrey told her gently but firmly. "Adult choices with adult consequences. Protecting her from those consequences now doesn't help her grow." As for Natalie herself, our relationship remains fractured. 3 months after her court appearance, she sent a letter, not an email or text, but an actual letter, handwritten on stationery. The words were right on the surface. "I'm sorry for what happened at the lake house. I never meant for things to go so far." But the undertone remained one of deflection. "If you had just answered my calls about needing a place to stay, none of this would have happened." I read the letter several times, trying to find genuine remorse between the lines of self-justification. Jeffrey helped me craft a response that maintained my boundaries while leaving the door cracked open for future healing, if and when Natalie was truly ready to take responsibility for her actions. "I acknowledge your apology," I wrote. "The damage done to my property can be repaired or replaced. The damage to our relationship will take longer to heal. When you're ready to talk about what really happened, not just at the lake house, but in the patterns that led us there, I'll be willing to listen." I haven't received a reply. I don't expect one anytime soon. Healing happens on its own timeline, and some people aren't ready to do the difficult work it requires. Derek is no longer in the picture. According to my parents, Natalie filed for divorce 2 months after the court case concluded. His continued legal troubles and inability to hold a job finally became too much for even her to justify. I feel a complicated mix of emotions about this development relief, that his toxic influence is removed, sadness for Natalie's pain, and a cautious hope that this might be the rock bottom she needed to hit before rebuilding her life on healthier foundations. As for me, life at the lake house has slowly returned to the peaceful retreat I always intended it to be. I've made more of an effort to connect with neighbors like Martin, building a community of people who look out for each other's properties and interests. I've installed a boat slip with a lockable cover for my new fishing boat. The insurance settlement covered a replacement for the one Natalie and Derek damaged beyond repair. Most importantly, I've rebuilt my sense of boundaries around family obligations. Working with Jeffrey helped me understand that healthy boundaries aren't selfish. They're necessary for healthy relationships. I no longer feel guilty for saying no when asked for unreasonable favors. I've learned to distinguish between helping and enabling, between generosity and being taken advantage of. This hard-won wisdom has led me to start a small support group for others dealing with family betrayal. We meet monthly at a coffee shop in Boston, sharing stories and strategies. It's been healing to transform my painful experience into something that helps others navigate similar waters. Last weekend, I took my first solo fishing trip since the incident. As I sat in my boat at dawn, watching the mist rise off the lake, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. My grandfather's tackle box and rods couldn't be replaced, but I'd mounted the broken pieces in a shadow box on the wall of the den, a reminder not of the betrayal, but of his legacy of patience and craftsmanship. Next to it hangs a new collection of fishing gear that I'm gradually building, pieces chosen with care and intention. The lessons from this experience are etched deep in my consciousness now. True family respects boundaries. Generosity should be met with gratitude, not entitlement. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their actions. And perhaps most importantly, the family you choose can sometimes be more reliable than the family you're born into. As I write this from my deck, watching another sunset paint the lake with gold and crimson, I realize that despite everything, or perhaps because of it, I've found a deeper appreciation for this place I fought to reclaim. The sanctuary isn't just in the physical space, but in the peace I've made with my own story. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? What helped you through that process? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you found value in my story, please hit that like button subscribe to hear more real-life experiences, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to protect what's rightfully theirs. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most necessary growth.